Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm Monica. I use she, her, hers pronouns. And as mentioned, I am the assistant program manager at Rebus Community, a nonprofit that focuses on helping find open publishing pathways for faculty in higher ed. Prior to that, though, however, I was at Boise State working with Teresa. And so what we're sharing with you today is a little bit about the work that I was able to do there in my capacity as an OER coordinator for our eCampus Center. Teresa, if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure, thank you. Thanks both to Anna and the whole Northwest eLearn group for inviting us to speak today, and for Monica for working with me both on this presentation and what we're going to talk about today. As Anna said, am the interim administrative director at the Center for Teaching and Learning at Boise State, but I'm also an adjunct faculty member there and teach in the Department of Theater, Film, and Creative Writing. So specifically, we're going to talk today about work that Monica and I did for my online theater history course. And feel free to, as it says on the slide, introduce yourselves via the chat. So we have a sense of who's here and what institutions you're from.
To get us started today, we have a little poll, and the idea is here is to help us understand where you all are coming from and the experience you shared. No wrong answers, so feel free to go ahead and take a minute to post your response to that.
Great, it looks like most of you have voted. A couple of more folks. We'll give you another few seconds there. This will just help give us a sense of where we should start in our conversation about OER. Okay, I think we can go ahead and end the poll, Anna.
Awesome. And share the results. All right, so it looks like quite a few of you are familiar with OER. You have heard of it in some capacity. It's hard not to have in the last year that we've had, as it has had such a role in helping us make that flip to online only. And then we also have someone here who has experience in the OER creation process. So welcome, we're so glad you're here, and feel free to share your experience and insights in that process with us today during our session. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, I'm going to give you guys a brief introduction to OER, but I'm not going to dive too deeply since we're all pretty familiar. They're openly licensed resources that permit reuse and revision. The key here is not that just that they're free. Free ensures the access, but being able to remix, revise, and reuse them is what makes them so powerful as educational tools. You're no longer required to just make do with what the textbook is published as. You're able to actually innovate on it, improve it, make it localized to your scenario. Or, as you'll find out with Teresa's work, even include the work of students so that students are seeing real life, tangible things from their fellow classmates. So we like to encourage folks to use OER because it provides that day one access to course materials. We see this as particularly important in the online environment, as we often see these shorter course models. And so getting folks to have all their materials on day one can really help. You're not waiting a week or so or more for a textbook to arrive in the mail or for funding to allow you to purchase your textbook. So we're reducing the extent to which students fall behind, particularly in the online environment. OER also there tends to be a misconception that it is mostly just textbooks. I do like to encourage folks to know that it's far beyond textbooks, includes all sorts of materials to support student learning. That can include lecture slides, interactive activities, websites, multimedia videos, all sorts of different ways to engage with students. Text-based is still the most common just because I think that's what most folks are familiar with. But just know that you can think pretty big with OER, and it's not restricted just to textbooks. To give you all a little bit of context, Boise State's OER Grant program is what seeded this project. I served as the OER coordinator for our eCampus Center, and our specific goal was to support the retention and success of online students. And so we knew that our students were facing financial barriers coming into their courses. And so our eCampus Center really invested in making sure that we had some OER support for our faculty who are developing these courses to make them more accessible from day one. The funding amount, we were able to offer $1,000 stipends for faculty implementing OER. This helped to ensure to some capacity that their labor is funded. I think in OER work, a lot of this work is kind of something we volunteer, we do off the side of our desks. And as amazing as it is to see that commitment, we want to move beyond that. It's a really integral part of teaching in the 21st century. And so we want to make sure it's accessible and supported. And so we did our best to provide stipends for faculty, and Teresa was one of those. As a part of this, we also provided the technology infrastructure to support the work. So we use Pressbooks, which you'll see more about today. It was integrated into courses via an institutional LMS, Blackboard at the time, it is now Canvas. And that Pressbooks works really well with a lot of different LMSs. And so we were fairly confident in using Pressbooks and knowing that it would port over to future LMS changes, which we're very glad. We also made use of Hypothesis for annotation activities. This is a free open tool that allows for public open annotation on the web. And this was a great space to have students interact and write in the margins essentially together in a virtual space. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that as well, but those are the kind of tools we had set up to make sure that this project was successful. And then of course, I was involved in institutional support. OER coordinator provided search and technology support and assisted in uploading and formatting the resource, which I think really was helpful in making sure that it was manageable to both redesign some assessments to be more open pedagogy focused and get the materials out there and ready to go for students to read. We also had some data support from a learning analyst as well on the team. And so just having those support folks there to ensure that the work wasn't solely carried by faculty, I think was an important piece of the puzzle. Is there any additional context you'd like to share, Teresa, or?
I'm happy to talk about kind of what led me to apply for this project and do this work. And that was really, even before this grant project was announced, I was aware of OER. I was also very aware that my course, when I first started teaching it online, had 2 textbooks. It had a play anthology and a theater history textbook. So there were already about $150 worth of book costs for my students. So I was aware of the cost. I was also thinking about whether those texts were really the most useful, if they were really helping students learn. One of the challenges I have with my online course is that it is often the first online course that theater majors take. It's a required course for theater majors, often the first one they're taking online. And so I've had some students struggle, and what really then led me to kind of put all these pieces together and move forward with this grant program, besides the fact that there was a grant program that really helped me say yes to this. But the real incentive was because I've had students struggle in the course, I've been reaching out to them to see, what I could do, what support they needed. And I spoke with one student who said that she was not able to do the most recent quiz that we did because the person who was supposed to be taking pictures of the textbook pages for her had not texted them to her. And that was kind of for me the final straw of just really understanding what my students were going through, trying to make their learning accessible. And so this grant program came at a great time because I realized I needed to take some action and make something that was accessible to my students who are working and in theater performances and rehearsals. And so the fact that we could have something online that they could have access to all the time, that's free, and that's really more targeted to the kind of learning I want them to do in the course, it all kind of came together to create this Pressbook.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what makes it so unique is they had these barriers to access the course materials, but the course materials themselves were often already in the public domain, which is how we were able to do this project at all, because these plays were out of copyright.
Yes, yeah. So the course that we're talking about today, and if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide, Monica, we can start to talk about the Pressbook itself.
Yeah.
So this course is part of a 3-course sequence for all theater majors in theater history, but this one goes from the beginning of theater to the Renaissance. So about 2,000 years of theater history in 15 weeks. But as Monica pointed out, all of those plays are at least in their original form, are in the public domain, and many of the translations or updated versions of them are also in the public domain. So that helped a lot in creating the Pressbook that we're talking about today. So in just a few minutes, we are going to, or actually Anna's going to, she's really helping us today, is going to put you in some breakout rooms to take a look at the Pressbook, and I will pop the link into the chat. So we're going to invite you to take some time in your small groups to look through the Pressbook and discuss and answer these questions, which I think Amy is ready to put in the chat for us. If you wouldn't mind, Amy, that would be great. So you have them with you when you go into your breakout rooms. And so the questions you'll be talking about and then be prepared to speak to is, what do you think was most challenging about creating the book? In what ways do you think this text supports student learning? And then what is one question you have about developing a resource like this? So we're going to give you some time to look through it in your groups, talk about those questions. And then when you come back, we will ask for some reporting out on what your thoughts were about those questions. When you get to your breakout rooms, if you just do a quick round of introductions of your name, your pronouns, if you're comfortable, the institution that you're with, and your role there. And then the spokesperson is the person who's been in their role the longest. So take a couple of minutes to do those introductions, and then start to dive into the Pressbook and start to answer those questions. And we'll give you, and I think we can do these for about 10 minutes. So we'll bring you back in about 10 minutes to talk about those things. What questions do you have before we send you out into the breakout room? And if you can add any questions you have into the chat, we'll make sure to clarify any expectations before you are invited to a room. Any questions? Well, if you end up having questions when you're in the breakout room, you can use the ask a question, raise your hand feature, and someone will come in and answer them for you. But in the meantime, Anna, if you can go ahead and open the breakout rooms, and we will see you all back in about 10 minutes.
Welcome back, everyone.
I'm back. And we thought we would stop sharing for right now, just because there's enough of us here that we can just have a conversation about what your observations were, and then we can switch back to slides at some point. But I will turn it over to Monica to invite your responses to the questions.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and kick off kind of with the more general one of, what do you think was most challenging about creating this book? If I could have a spokesperson from each breakout room share, that'd be great. If not, I'm happy to just kind of go down the list. But yeah, what do you all think was most challenging about this project?
Well, I think with any OER project, the challenge is finding the right materials and then integrating them. Particularly if you find a book that does pretty much what you want, then you're pretty far along the way, and you can just customize it. But if you're creating something, as it looks like it was done here, finding the resources and then gluing them together. I noticed there's a foreword written by, I think, somebody there. So that's always the biggest challenge, is finding stuff that will work for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. I think both Teresa and I really resonated with that from thinking back to our process on this. There are so many great OER resources out there that you can pick up and work with, so you're not starting from scratch, but we really were kind of going down to the root here. I know that we had done a lot of searching to see what additional theater OER had been out there. And while there was a lot of contextual things, there wasn't anything that compiled key historical plays. So we didn't even have a model in terms of seeing other like play anthologies yet in the field of open.
Yeah, and I would say that's definitely an area where Monica and her support was crucial in really looking through to find openly available versions of all of these plays. Again, it helps that most of them would be in the public domain, but in a couple of cases we did have to, she had to dig a little bit to find something that was going to be, had been translated correctly. I mean, Tartuffe is an example of something that was challenging to find. Some of the Asian plays, in fact, there's one that the students read that's actually not in the OER textbook because that we had to pull from our library. And that was certainly a place, so between internet searching and also working with our library to see what resources were available that we hadn't yet accessed was really crucial. And one thing I'll note, I mean, we might get into this a little bit later, but Jerry, since you noted a forward piece, one of the things that you might have noticed, there's a couple of introductions to plays. Not all of them have them yet, and that's because that's an ongoing process that I'm working on with my students. So their final project for the past 2 years, since I've been using this textbook for two courses now, their final project is to write an introduction to one of the plays, since our anthology does not yet have them. And so I've now added 2. There's also another one that's on our LMS. So 3 total of introductions to the plays that students have written. And so I continue to add. I just added one this afternoon, so there'd be another one there for you to see. So we hope to add more of that kind of work going forward as well. Yeah, did any of the other groups have a different challenge? Yeah, Justina.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, jumped out at some of us that the images and management of copyright would be certainly a challenge. Noticed that, there's a couple images that were listed as illustrations from so-and-so, and it wasn't clear if those were also Creative Commons. And I know that Pressbooks has some places to put all that detail behind the scenes, and sometimes it'll attach it to the bottom of the page as a extra information about the images. And figuring all that out could be a job in and of itself. And then certainly paying attention to accessibility, and then in my experience putting together kind of a similar thing, it was political science, but it was all public domain, ancient kind of stuff, and all the different formattings and pulling it all together and getting it just uniform and then restyled was really hard, time consuming.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, it can be. Then there are some shortcuts that can make it a little bit more achievable, but overall it does just take the hours to upload and to refine things. I think Pressbooks makes it sort of easy in comparison to a lot of other tools, like if you're just trying to format out a document. But yeah, no, those were definitely ongoing challenges. I actually had a chance to work on an art history textbook with a faculty member who hadn't kept track of the copyrights on their images, but was very well connected in the art scene, and so had gotten like informal permission from lots of different artists. And so we had to go back and like track all of that down. And I learned from that process and used as well in creating Teresa's book that a multimedia management, like a tracking sheet, is so helpful. To be able to capture alt text, to be able to capture your description, your licensing, all of those things in one spot, so that you know that that is accurate and someone down the road can take your resource and make a copy of it without having to worry about those copyright restrictions.
Was there another challenge from the third group, or did we capture the challenges the third group discussed?
Oh, I was the third group.
I actually should have paid attention. I don't know. I believe there were 3.
I brought up editing, but then they said, well, you've got materials that are in existence. Editing shouldn't be as hard, but you brought up the translation issues. So that's, getting that editing consistent throughout and getting maybe peer editors or, people on board to go through these things is always so useful. And I would add, anything you link to can die. So that's always a challenge.
For sure.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Monica, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say there is one more group that was Amy, Ben, and Daphne. If there was a spokesperson, whoever your spokesperson was there, if there was a different challenge that came up.
We mostly talked about the similar things, getting all the content, all the copyright. And Daphne said, yeah, that tracking sheet, that's a really good idea. To keep,
It's a
keep everything
lifesaver.
straight. Yeah.
Great.
So the next kind of question is kind of, in what ways do you see this supporting student learning? Obviously, access is one of them. So we're going to just set that one aside. Having access to the materials, great. Yes, baseline minimum for student success. But what ways did you all see the potential for the supporting student success in a way that maybe a commercial publisher might not be able to? Was there any threads there that anyone wanted to share out about?
One thing that we talked about in our group was that there's, you can download this in a variety of formats to be able to access it offline. But as we were talking also, the realization that you don't have to log into a third-party platform and dig through a lot of menus to get to the book. It's just a simple link that the students can just have on a bookmark, in their browser or something like that. So using third-party platforms has its place, perhaps, but it's kind of hard to dig through the level of menus and the hierarchies there. So it's pretty accessible just with one simple link.
Yeah, that's a great point. I appreciate you bringing that up, Ben, because it's not just about having a free resource, it's having a free resource that people can go back to and use, and it's not taxing to go back and use. Like, it makes it more likely that they're going to read the materials, that they'll reference them when they're doing their activities. And then, as you mentioned, the downloadable file types is a huge accessibility feature that can ensure, even if you don't have internet access at home, you can download a copy to your phone or print at your library and have that. And I know we struggle a lot in Idaho in particular with internet access gaps. And so I know that feature is particularly helpful. Anyone else?
So one thing that came up in ours is the customization of the book, customizes it for specifically what the students need for that class, because it's been put together for that, rather than taking something that the publisher might publish that isn't, that has parts that you don't need or maybe isn't quite right. This would be pretty closely aligned with the actual course.
Yes.
We presume anyway.
Yes, so far so good. Absolutely. And that was certainly one of the things that we were thinking about. I mean, the play anthology that the students had been using, because at the time I also taught the course that followed this. So I was able to kind of at least let them use it across both courses, but still, has at least 10 to 15 plays that we don't cover in either course. So there's a lot of extra stuff there. And the theater history textbook I had been using is really well known in the field, but is very detailed and scholarly and really more in-depth knowledge than students at this level for this particular program needed to have necessarily. So one of the things, and I think one of them is embedded in the Pressbook for the introduction to Indian theater. But one of the things Monica and I also did was find videos either through our library or online that covered the historical context. And so that students are assigned that. And so that's how we, again, really focused what I needed them to learn about a particular period of time, as well as then specifically which plays we're reading. So it did really help align the content with what we were talking about in class. Yeah.
And it goes a long way. Like, there's something about the dynamic when you parse back some of that content, like there's a difference between going into this course and having a huge Norton anthology with all of these footnotes and being able to open up just something that's really mobile friendly. I can check it on my phone and quickly watch a video that gets me what I need to know so that I can understand it.
Yeah. And it sounds like that's what the other group talked about as well, kind of aligning the course content. Any other ideas or thoughts that came up about how this text might support student learning?
I was also thinking from accessibility point of view, a digital tool like or resources like this may be more friendly with using screen readers. If it's a printed textbook, sometimes students have to go to disability services to get the recording of this, and that takes extra time. So in that sense, this may speed up the process quite a bit and avoid the delay some students may run into.
Absolutely, that's such a great point. And something that I love about OER in particular is that even when that remediation kind of work happens, we're actually able to share it back. So if at some point Teresa wanted to do a new type of assignment where students maybe read out the play or portions of the play, those could be put together and then put in the book as well. And so that we're sharing out even more further accessible versions in the future. It doesn't have to stay static like it would with all rights reserved, where you're allowed to make those remediation changes, but only on a case-by-case basis, which means future students are not allowed to benefit from that work.
Yeah. Other thoughts? I know one other thing Monica and I wanted to touch on is she had mentioned in her overview that one of the other tools that were part of this grant is Hypothesis with the social annotation tool. And so what this also allowed me to do is to use Hypothesis and have students do assignments where they're making connections between what they're learning in the historical context piece and the play itself. So I'd ask them to point out, take a moment in the play and add something that you learned about the historical context that explains why they might be doing it that way. And I was really, with the first time I did that, I was super excited about the kinds of things that they added because it really helped. I still felt like I had not cracked the nut and how do I get students to see how what they're learning about the historical context appears in the plays. And that was such a great way for them to make those connections and to learn from each other about the connections they were making. So that was a kind of added bonus of having something that they could annotate and work on and make comments on. So that certainly has helped student learning in the course, kind of a nice side benefit.
Absolutely. It was really exciting too to see it happen in real time. Like I'm not teaching the course, but I was able to see students going in and actually like commenting on this resource. And it was just cool to see the evidence of the learning actually on the page.
Yeah.
So our final question is, do you all have questions about this process and kind of, so what is one question you have about developing a resource like this in your context? So if we could all share out about that, I think that would be great. Anyone want to kick us off?
It's because you were so crystal clear earlier, Monica, about the steps that needed to happen.
That must be it.
I have a question.
Yeah,
go ahead.
This is Jerry Hopkins.
Hi, Jerry.
Does Pressbooks, does it cost to use it, to create a book? Is there a cost involved?
Yes, so the cost is on the institutional side. So there's a cost for Boise State at the time to create this resource, but it is not a cost that transfers directly to students. And so it is not something like a student pay model as we see with a lot of others like Top Hat, NWeLearn. A lot of those other OER providers often attach it there. The other great thing is that there's no cost to share it. So now that it's up, Boise State has funded the cost of this development of this book. It can be shared across institution. There are no restrictions around that, or whether somebody wanted to download a copy and use it in their institution across the country or across the world, they can do that without any fees.
Okay, so it's an enterprise-wide. Did Boise State buy it for the whole campus, or did they just buy it for one department? Or okay,
yeah. So your institution will buy it for the institution buys it, and then you have kind of a free range to make as many books as you want. And those faculty members making those books, they don't need to worry about the itemized cost for each book. They don't have to worry about their students paying for it, and they can share it with their colleagues regardless of their institution.
right, great, thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And do you have any guidance on how to manage different versions of the book? Like if someone created a book and a colleague kind of used this as a base and then developed their own version of it, do you have recommendations on naming and managing the versions, editions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So versioning history, I think Pressbooks does a nice job of building this in. So once you go out and create a clone of the resource, it kind of tracks that. So folks can see in the metadata and annotations for the book, the original source material. And so being able to have that point back to the original work and the original author is really great. In terms of kind of keeping track beyond that, keeping your naming clear, concise, steering away from spending, too much time having like OER in the title can be helpful. Yeah, so those, like for Teresa's course, we like directly tied it to the course, and she is the only one teaching this course at our institution, right? So that it helps reduce the chance that students will like it mixed up about what book is their book. But in my work with the composition faculty at that institution as well, there was some concern around, okay, we could have a plethora of versions. Students are taking a required like first year writing course, for example, those links could get passed back and forth and things could get really messy quickly. And so making sure that like faculty have a clear home for their resource, consistent links, those things can help reduce some of that confusion. And then having a clear departmental communication on that too.
Great, thank you so much.
No, it's a great question.
I have another question.
Mhm.
So is in your class search system, when students go to look, are the books tagged as this is an OER class or course, or do they have to actually select the course first to look and see what the course materials are?
Good question. Our institution, unless it's changed, we don't have OER course marking yet. That is a super tricky area, but there are some really great resources on that. In fact, I think the University of Texas system did some work around course markings and best practices for developing that, because you have to get so many stakeholders involved in terms of like your registrar and the software you're using and all of those things.
Yeah, we had the same problem at I also did OER introduction to OER and wrote grants for Central Washington University, and we had the same problem. And the big problem was with faculty, actually, because those who aren't comfortable with OER didn't want, they were just like, hey, when you put there's no cost in the textbooks, the students will select your class regardless, because they don't trust that the materials are as rigorous or something. So they're like, hey, you're taking our students away, sort of thing. So I wonder, do you have that issue at Boise State?
I have heard that argument before. So I don't know if it's an issue per se, but I have heard that pushback before. It's not in relation to this specific course. It's more in relation to those high enrollment required courses where students do, so to speak, shop around for their best experience, whether that's ratemyprofessor.com or taking a look and seeing if textbooks are assigned. Unfortunately, it's kind of just their reality is that students get to make more informed decisions about their courses, hopefully. And
that's a good thing.
It can make some people uncomfortable. Yeah, I mean, I get it. I hear it. I don't think we have a solution for it though.
Not right away, but I'm sure you're working on it. Everybody's working on that thing.
True.
Thank you.
Yeah. Right now, for the most part, students, in order to know that the course is OER, you would need to reach out to the faculty member, or through our bookstore does keep track of adoptions. And so you can go in and look and see what the required materials are there. But you have to be a pretty savvy student who already knows how the system and the institution is set up to be able to access that information. And so generally, I would say it's not as likely that students know going in. I don't know if you want to speak to anything about that, Teresa, though.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, in my case, my course is a required course for theater majors. So, so there, and you're right, I'm the only one that teaches it right now. So I am their one-stop shop. But I certainly did hear anecdotally from students the first semester that I implemented it, that they were really excited that it was, that I was using an OER textbook and they didn't have to pay for it and they could access it at any time. So, they may not have had a choice going in, but they were happy about it once they got there. That's for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. And thank you, Justina. She's been shared a resource in the chat about getting a faculty license, individual faculty license. So thanks for sharing that. Any other questions? Okay, so Monica, if you don't mind putting the slides back up, we thought we would wrap up with a little time for reflection on what we've discussed today and how you might apply some ideas from what we've talked about today to your own work, either in supporting faculty or if any of you are also teaching and would use OER materials. So I'm just going to keep an eye on the clock here and give you about a minute or so to reflect, maybe jot down some ways in which you might apply some ideas from this session to your own work, and then we'll take a few minutes to share some of those out. Would anyone like to share either in the chat or by unmuting yourself to share verbally something that you, from this discussion, that you might apply to your own work?
Well, I really like this, the sheet, having a sheet to keep track of the resources.
Mm-hmm.
It's really helpful. And I would also say having a source document to keep track of the materials as they come through, and like having a spreadsheet where you indicate, okay, this is the source file, it has been uploaded, it has been formatted and checked. This allows you to pass it off to someone else. And so I was able to tag in some help here and there because I knew where the status of each chapter was, or each section. Yeah, super helpful.
Oh, great. Justina shared, love to know more about how OER increases equity and access to course materials. Yeah, and that ties in really well, Justina, to some work that hopefully I'll be doing along with some of our folks from eCampus, including Ben Croft, who's here with us today. Doing some research. We did try in the fall of 2019 to do some research with students about what their experience was, both with the Pressbook and using the hypothesis tool. And for whatever reason, even though we offered the money, we didn't gather quite enough student feedback to really give us what we needed. But Ben and I are working on a renewed research project for this fall to really specifically get students to reflect on what they're learning in the course and to give us some data around what the experience is of using the Pressbook. So hopefully in future iterations of a conversation like this, we'll have some actual student data as opposed to the anecdata, as I like to refer to it, in terms of how students have just talked with me about the textbook, but actually have some data specifically around equity and access to the course materials. So hopefully more on that soon, Justina.
Yes, totally. And I'm excited to hear what comes out of that because yeah, there's a lot of possibilities enabled by OER, but getting to the other end where we actually can capture what that impact is really tricky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Amy added sharing accessible resources, like Monica had said, you know, beyond just for one student on a one-time thing, but just making it accessible from the beginning to really help out with that thing you're talking about there, Justina, with the equity and access. Great, thank you. Well, glad that there's some ideas for next steps and application that came out of that. I think on the next slide, Monica has some other suggestions.
So I just want to go over a few kind of ways I'd point you, directions I'd point you for next steps. I've kind of chunked it out because I know that we're all coming from different roles and different positions. So the first one is if you're interested in creating or helping create a textbook. And the second one is if you're interested in building support more generally for OER on your campus. These things go together really well. You really can't have one or the other. We need to be building these kind of robust initiatives to support this work and value it. But both of them start with the same idea. Familiarize yourself with campus resources, library, instructional technology, our educational access center, the Center for Teaching and Learning, whatever resources you have on your campus. Knowing who's there and who's interested in working on OER can go a really long way in making sure you have the support you need. You don't have to take the entire burden on yourself. There are folks out there who want to collaborate with you. You might also even think about collaborating with a fellow faculty member to share the workload if it's a course that you know other folks in your department are teaching, or at a nearby community college, for example. You can reach out and build those relationships and work together, which can really help. The next step is to search for what's out there. OER is most effective when we avoid starting from scratch. Teresa and I ended up having to start from scratch in a lot of ways, but it's important to get a survey of what's out there. You don't want to reinvent the wheel, and you can build on other people's work because of open licenses. And then finally, creating a plan. Outline the resource you'd like to create and then prioritize the most important sections. Remember that it's a living resource. And so you don't have to get it all right the first time. It's better to prioritize and get a first draft out there, a kind of a beta test that you can run with students. And then develop those pieces over time and add to it. As Teresa has mentioned, it doesn't have to be one and done. You get to add on to it. And that's something that's really powerful about this process. Teresa, do you have anything to add in terms of creating or helping create a resource?
No, I think you've covered it. I think the only thing I would just I would underline that idea of prioritizing. I mean, particularly in this case, we have the support of the grant and Monica's work and really kind of targeted to this area that really helped. If I were talking with someone who was going to do this more on their own, then certainly thinking about it in terms of baby steps of, can you just start with one play, find another, not have the pressure of kind of building it all together, but ultimately having all the pieces together to be able to create a standalone piece like this.
Exactly. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective. So if we're thinking about more general support for your OER on your campus, in addition to familiarizing yourself, you're going to take those relationships you're building across campus and turn that into a working group. I can't stress enough how much of a difference maker this is, regardless of whether departments had funding or a grant or retained staff that could support. A working group is a central place where everyone who's passionate about OER can come together to share the workload. And so Boise State continues to have a very robust OER working group. And I think that is in part responsible for why we were able to build these cool grant programs that provide the support in the first place. It doesn't have to be super formal, but pulling staff and faculty from various departments can really ensure that everyone is on the same page, that you're not working redundantly, and that you're connecting people to their resources. And so because of this work, I was able to lean on the library and instructional technology to make sure we had the right materials, and the Educational Access Center to make sure that I was making the materials as accessible as I could. So collaboration is at the heart of this work, and I highly encourage it through a working group. Anything else to add to that point, Teresa?
No, not at all. You covered it.
Well, that concludes what we have to share with you all today. We so appreciate your time and energy coming to learn a bit about our project. And we welcome you to contact us with any questions that you may have.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn about this today. And again, thank you to Northwest eLearning for inviting us to talk about it. And do feel free to reach out if you have questions or would like to learn more.